The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that changes everything. Detective Miller's voice was measured professional, but I could hear the weight behind his words. "Miss Sarah Chen, this is Detective Miller from the Metropolitan Police Department. We need you to come down to the station. Your father and your sister Tiffany have been arrested for fraud, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. We've also uncovered evidence of domestic violence in their past. You're the only person we can trust to testify." I stood there in my kitchen, the phone pressed against my ear, staring at the small scar on my forehead that I usually covered with bangs. That scar had been there for 7 years now, a permanent reminder of the day everything changed. The day my father slammed my head into the refrigerator door so hard it left a dent in the metal. If this story hits close to home, smash that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment if you've ever had to choose yourself over toxic family. I want to hear your story. But let me take you back to the beginning to understand how I ended up in that kitchen on that morning, and why that phone call 7 years later felt like both vindication and grief wrapped into one impossible moment. I grew up in a house where love was conditional and approval was currency. My father, Richard Chen, was a second-generation immigrant who'd built his identity around the idea of family loyalty above all else. He worked as a construction foreman, came home every night smelling of sawdust and sweat, and ruled our household with an iron fist wrapped in the language of tradition and respect. My mother had left when I was 12, and I'd spent the next 16 years trying to fill the void she'd left behind, trying to be daughter enough, woman enough, caretaker enough for a man who would never be satisfied. Tiffany was born when I was 3, and from the moment she arrived, the hierarchy in our house was clear. She was the baby, the precious one, the one who could do no wrong. I was the responsible one, the helper, the one who existed to make everyone else's life easier. When Mom left, I became the cook, the cleaner, the second parent to a 9-year-old who learned early that tears and tantrums got her whatever she wanted. By the time I was 21, I'd finished community college with a certificate in medical billing. I'd been working full-time since I was 18, contributing to the household expenses, buying groceries, paying utilities. I met Marcus at a friend's party, and for 6 months I thought I'd found my way out. He was charming, attentive, said all the right things about building a future together. When I got pregnant, I was terrified but also hopeful. Maybe this was my chance to create the family I'd always wanted, the one where people actually cared about each other. Marcus disappeared the day I told him about the baby. Blocked my number, moved out of his apartment, vanished like he'd never existed. I was 22, pregnant, and living in my father's house with a sister who was now 19 and had just wrecked her second car. My father's reaction to my pregnancy was predictable. Shame, disappointment, lectures about responsibility and embarrassment, and how I'd brought disgrace to the family name. But beneath the anger was something else, something I didn't recognize at the time: opportunity. I was trapped now. I couldn't leave. I had nowhere to go, no money saved, and a baby on the way. I was his forever. Leo was born on a cold November morning, 6 weeks early, tiny and perfect and terrifying in his fragility. I held him in the hospital and made him a promise I would give him a better life than I'd had. I would protect him. I would love him unconditionally, the way I'd always wished someone would love me. But promises are easier to make than keep when you're living in survival mode. The first few years with Leo were a blur of exhaustion and constant tension. I worked full-time at a medical billing company, came home to cook dinner for my father, and Tiffany took care of. Leo cleaned the house, did the laundry, paid more than my share of the bills. Tiffany, meanwhile, drifted from job to job, each one lasting a few months before she'd quit or get fired. She'd come home with shopping bags full of clothes and makeup paid for with credit cards that were somehow always maxed out. My father enabled her completely. When she couldn't make her car payment, he'd pressure me to help. When she needed money for rent on an apartment she'd impulsively rented and couldn't afford, I was expected to cover it. When her credit cards were declined, I was supposed to put her purchases on mine, and I did. God help me, I did it over and over, because saying no meant days of silent treatment, meant my father's anger turned on me, meant Leo growing up in a house full of tension I'd caused. By the time Leo was 5, I'd co-signed on 2 of Tiffany's car loans. Both cars had been repossessed after she stopped making payments, but somehow, miraculously, the repossession companies never came after me for the balance. I later learned my father had connections, had called in favors, had made deals I didn't want to know about. But he never let me forget what he'd done, never let me forget that I owed him. I was 27 years old, working 60-hour weeks, raising a son alone and slowly drowning in a debt I hadn't created and a family dynamic that was suffocating me. I started seeing a therapist through my work's employee assistance program. 3 free sessions. That's all I could afford. but those 3 sessions changed something in me. The therapist, Dr. Patricia Wade, asked me a question no one had ever asked before. Sarah, if your best friend was in your situation, what would you tell her to do? I'd stared at her, unable to answer because the truth was so obvious and so impossible at the same time. I'd tell her to leave. I'd tell her to run. I'd tell her she deserved better, and that her son deserved to grow up in a home without constant conflict. But I wasn't my best friend. I was me, and leaving felt impossible. Dr. Wade gave me homework. Keep a journal, she said. Write down every interaction that makes you feel uncomfortable, every boundary that gets crossed, every moment you swallow your words to keep the peace. Don't analyze it yet, just document it. I bought a small notebook and kept it hidden in my work bag. For 2 months I wrote, and as the pages filled, I started to see patterns I'd been too close to recognize. The way Tiffany would wait until my father was in a bad mood to ask me for money, knowing I'd be more likely to say yes to avoid making things worse. The way my father would compare me to my absent mother whenever I pushed back, knowing that comparison cut deeper than any insult. The way they'd both use Leo as leverage, suggesting that my choices would affect his future, his stability, his chance at a normal life. It was manipulation. Calculated, deliberate, effective manipulation. But knowing it and escaping it were two different things. The breaking point started building 3 weeks before that terrible morning. Tiffany showed up at dinner with a new boyfriend, Jason, who drove a Mercedes and wore a Rolex, and talked loudly about his real estate investments. Within a week, she'd announced they were moving in together. Within 2 weeks, she'd come to me with paperwork for yet another car loan. Jason's buying me a BMW, she said, her eyes bright with excitement, spreading the loan documents across the kitchen table where I was helping Leo with his homework. But I need a co-signer because of my credit history. It's just a formality, Sarah. Jason's gonna make all the payments. He's got plenty of money. I just need your signature. I looked at the papers. A $70,000 loan for a luxury car. For my 25-year-old sister who'd never kept a job longer than 4 months and who had 2 repossessions already on her record. Tiffany, I can't, I said, carefully aware that Leo was listening, that my father was in the next room watching television. This is too much. If something happens... Nothing's going to happen, she snapped. God, Sarah, you're always so negative, so suspicious. Can't you just be happy for me for once? Can't you just help your sister without making it into some big dramatic thing? My father appeared in the doorway, and I knew from his expression that this conversation had been planned. They'd coordinated this. Tiffany had waited until he was home to approach me, knowing I'd be less likely to refuse with an audience. What's the problem here, he asked, his voice already edged with irritation. There's no problem, I said quietly. I'm just not comfortable co-signing on a $70,000 loan. She's your sister, my father said, as if that explained everything, as if those 3 words were supposed to override every logical objection, every instinct for self-preservation. I know she is, I replied, keeping my voice steady, trying to model for Leo how to be firm without being aggressive. But I can't put my financial security at risk. I have Leo to think about. I'm already stretched thin with bills. You make more money than she does, my father interrupted. You've got a stable job. You can afford to help family. That's what family does. I wanted to point out that I made more money because I actually kept my job, because I showed up every day, because I didn't quit whenever I got bored or didn't like my manager. I wanted to point out that my stable job was supporting 3 adults and a child in a house where I only occupied 1 bedroom. I wanted to scream that I'd been helping family my entire life, and where had it gotten me? Instead, I said I'm sorry, but my answer is no. The temperature in the room dropped. Tiffany's face twisted into something ugly. My father's jaw clenched. And Leo, sweet Leo, sensed the danger and quietly gathered his homework, retreating to our shared bedroom. Fine, Tiffany said, her voice like ice. Fine. I'll remember this, Sarah. When you need help, when you need something from me, I'll remember that you couldn't do this one simple thing for your own sister. She stormed out. My father stood there looking at me with disappointment so profound it felt physical. Your mother was selfish too, he said quietly. I see more of her in you every day. That was 3 weeks before the morning everything changed. 3 weeks of cold silences of Tiffany forgetting to help with dinner or pick up Leo from school when she'd promised to. 3 weeks of my father making pointed comments about family loyalty and sacrifice. 3 weeks of tension that wound tighter and tighter like a spring compressed past its limits. I should have known something was building. I should have recognized the signs. But I was so tired. Working my regular job, then pulling evening shifts at a pharmacy to save money for an apartment of my own. Helping Leo with school projects. trying to be everything to everyone while slowly realizing that I was nothing to anyone, including myself. Then came that morning. It started like any other day in that cramped, suffocating house where I'd grown up and somehow never managed to leave. I woke at 5:30 like always to get a head start on the day. I made my father's coffee the way he liked it, strong with 2 sugars. I packed Leo's lunch, tucking in a note that said, "You're amazing," because he'd been anxious about a spelling test. I started breakfast, scrambling eggs and making toast, moving quietly through the kitchen while the house was still dark and peaceful. That's when I heard them. Tiffany and my father, their voices rising from the living room. They'd been up early too, or maybe they'd never gone to bed. I caught fragments of conversation. "She'll do it. She always does eventually. Just need to push harder. Leo's the key." My stomach clenched. They were talking about me, planning something. When they entered the kitchen together, I knew it was orchestrated. Tiffany's face was set in determination, my father's in barely controlled anger. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like standing in the path of an approaching storm. The kitchen smelled like burnt eggs because I'd been distracted listening to them. Leo sat at the small kitchen table, his spoon moving mechanically through his cereal, his eyes downcast. At 6 years old, he'd already learned to read the room to make himself small and quiet when the adults were angry. The fact that he had to learn that skill at all should have told me everything I needed to know about the environment I was raising him in. But sometimes you're so deep in survival mode you can't see how badly you're drowning. Tiffany burst in like a storm, her designer purse swinging from her shoulder, her nails freshly manicured in a shade of red that looked like blood. She was 25 and had never held a job for more than 4 months, but somehow always had money for the latest phone, the newest clothes, the most expensive brunches with her friends. My father followed close behind his face, already that particular shade of red I'd learned to associate with violence. Tiffany slammed a stack of papers onto the table right next to Leo's cereal bowl, making milk slosh over the sides. My son flinched, his small hands gripping his spoon tighter. I saw his knuckles go white. "Sign it," Tiffany demanded, not even looking at me, her voice sharp and entitled. "I need a co-signer for this loan. Jason and I broke up and I still need the car. I don't have all day for your nonsense." So that was it. The boyfriend with the Mercedes and the Rolex was gone, but the $70,000 BMW loan remained. And she expected me to save her, again. I glanced at the papers. Same loan, same impossible amount, same disaster waiting to happen. My hands started to tremble, but I forced them still. I'd been practicing something in the mirror for 3 weeks now, ever since that last confrontation. 2 letters, 1 word. The hardest word I'd ever learned to say. "Tiffany, I can't." I started trying to keep my voice steady, trying to breathe normally, even though my heart was racing. "This is your loan, your car, your responsibility. I can't be responsible for—" "You will sign it," my father interrupted, his fist coming down on the table so hard that Leo's cereal bowl jumped, milk splashing onto his shirt. My son let out a small whimper, and I saw his eyes fill with tears he was too afraid to let fall. "She's your sister. You think she can do this on her own. You make more money than she does. You have the credit. You're going to help her. That's what this family does." I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, that voice in my head that had been trained over 28 years to comply, to accommodate, to sacrifice myself for the sake of keeping peace. The voice that said my needs didn't matter, that my feelings were selfish, that good daughters put family first, no matter the cost. But another voice had been growing stronger over the past 2 months of journal entries and late-night reflections. The voice that asked why love had to hurt so much. The voice that wondered why family meant I had to set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. The voice that finally was loud enough to hear. "No," I said quietly, but the word landed in the kitchen like a grenade. "I won't sign it. This is Tiffany's responsibility, not mine. I'm not going to put my name on a loan I can't afford for a car. I won't drive for a situation that's going to end the same way the last 2 did." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the old refrigerator seemed to stop humming. Time felt suspended, and in that moment I saw my father's face cycle through surprise, disbelief, and finally rage. Pure, undiluted rage. Tiffany laughed then, that sharp, mocking sound I'd heard my entire life, the laugh that said I was stupid, worthless beneath her. "Oh, so now you think you're better than us. You get a little independence, a little job, and suddenly you're too good for your own family? You think you're so special?" She turned to Leo, and my blood ran cold at the look in her eyes. "Leo, look at your mother. Look at what she is. This is what happens when you get a little bit of success. You forget where you came from. You forget who helped you. Look at her. This is what you're going to grow up to be. Useless. Just like her mother was." She was doing it deliberately, trying to weaponize my son against me, trying to teach a 6-year-old child that his mother was worthless, that standing up for yourself made you the bad guy, that saying no to exploitation made you selfish. The realization crashed over me like ice water. This wasn't just about a car loan. This was about control. This was about making sure I never escaped, never became strong enough to leave, never believed I deserved better. And she was doing it in front of my child. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice shaking but getting louder. "Don't you dare try to turn my son against me. He has nothing to do with this. This is between adults." "Everything's about that kid with you," Tiffany spat. "You think having a bastard child makes you some kind of martyr. You think struggling makes you noble. You're pathetic, Sarah. You've always been pathetic." My father moved then, and I recognized the look in his eyes. I'd seen it before throughout my childhood. When I was 16 and stayed out past curfew. When I was 20 and told him I was pregnant. When I was 23 and suggested maybe Tiffany should get a job and keep it. That look that said words weren't enough, that he needed to make his point physically to remind me of my place in the hierarchy of this house. "Your brain is worthless anyway," he said, his voice dropping to that cold, dangerous whisper that was somehow worse than shouting. Each word was deliberate, calculated. "You think you're smart. You think you can just say no to your family. Everything you have because of me. This roof over your head. The food you eat. Everything." I wanted to scream that I paid more than my share of rent, that I bought most of the groceries, that I'd been contributing financially since I was 18. But my mouth wouldn't form the words because he was advancing on me now, backing me into the corner of the kitchen, and Leo was crying, actual tears streaming down his face, and Tiffany was holding him by the shoulder, keeping him in his chair, making him watch. "Please," I said, hating the pleading in my voice but unable to stop it. "Please don't do this in front of Leo. Please." "Then sign the papers," my father said simply. I looked at the loan documents on the table. Then at my crying son. Then at my father's rage-filled face. And I realized something fundamental in that moment: it would never be enough. I could sign this loan. I could bail Tiffany out again, but in 6 months there'd be another crisis, another demand, another situation where I was expected to sacrifice myself. The pattern would continue until I had nothing left to give, and then they'd blame me for that too. "No," I whispered. Then louder, "No." My father's hand shot out and grabbed my hair. Not a gentle grab. A fistful, so much force that I felt strands ripping from my scalp. Leo screamed. Mommy and I heard him struggling against Tiffany's grip. My father yanked my head back and then forward with brutal force, and the last thing I saw before the impact was my own terrified reflection in the stainless steel of the refrigerator door. The sound was enormous. Metal on bone. My forehead struck the door so hard that the entire refrigerator shuddered. There was a moment of stunning clarity where I felt no pain at all, just surprise. Then everything exploded into stars and darkness, and a high-pitched ringing that drowned out everything else. I didn't lose consciousness, but I wished I had. I felt my legs give out, felt my father's hands release my hair, felt myself sliding down the refrigerator door, my face dragging against the cold metal, leaving a smear of blood behind. The kitchen tile was hard and dirty under my hands. I could smell the burnt eggs. Could hear Leo screaming like his world was ending. "That's what happens when you forget your place," my father said, his breathing heavy, standing over me like I was garbage he'd just taken out. "You have until noon to sign those papers. If you don't blame us for whatever happens next. And remember, we know where Leo goes to school. We know his teacher's name. Mrs. Patterson, right? Nice lady. Be a shame if she had to deal with any custody drama." The threat was clear. "Sign the papers or I'll make your son's life hell." Tiffany bent down, waving a pen in my face, her breath hot and smelling of coffee and spite. "Everything that happens from now on is your fault, Sarah. You're choosing this. You're choosing to be difficult. You're choosing to make everyone suffer." Then she whispered, so only I could hear her lips almost touching my ear. "And if you don't cooperate, if you make any more trouble, I'll call child services. I'll tell them you're unstable, that you hit Leo, that you're an unfit mother. And with your history of depression, with your single-parent status, who do you think they'll believe, me and Dad, the loving family, or you, the crazy single mom with anger issues?" The kitchen spun. Blood was running down my face into my eye, making everything red-tinged. My head throbbed with a pain so intense I thought I might vomit. But worse than the physical pain was the realization of what she'd just said. They'd use Child Protective Services against me. They'd try to take Leo. They'd destroy my life completely if I didn't comply. They left their footsteps heavy on the old floorboards, Tiffany's laughter echoing down the hallway like something from a nightmare. The front door slammed so hard that pictures rattled on the walls. Leo broke free and ran to me, his small hands on my face, his tears falling on my cheeks, mixing with my blood. "Mommy, mommy, mommy," he kept saying over and over, his voice raw from screaming. "Mommy, why do they hate us?" I pulled him close with shaking hands, tasting blood in my mouth, feeling the throbbing agony in my head where a lump was already forming. Something inside me broke in that moment. Not broke as in shattered, but broke as in broke free. Like a dam that had been holding back years of pressure suddenly giving way. Like chains that had been binding me my entire life suddenly snapping. "It's not you, baby," I told him, my voice shaking but firm, more certain than I'd ever been about anything. "It's never been you, and it's not me either. It's them. They're broken, Leo. They're sick, and we're not going to let them hurt us anymore." I got up slowly, my head spinning, the world tilting dangerously. I caught sight of myself in the small mirror by the kitchen door. There was blood on my face, running from a gash on my forehead. My left eye was already swelling. I looked like someone who'd been in a car accident. I looked like a victim. But I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like someone who'd just woken up from a 28-year nightmare. I cleaned myself up as best I could, hands trembling as I pressed paper towels to my forehead. The cut was deep enough that it probably needed stitches, but I wasn't going to the emergency room. I couldn't afford the time or the questions. Instead, I used butterfly bandages from the first aid kit and covered everything with a large Band-Aid. I looked at the dent in the refrigerator door. There was blood on the metal, my blood. There was a literal dent from where my head had hit. Evidence. Physical evidence of assault. I took out my phone and took pictures. Close-ups of the dent, of the blood, of my face from multiple angles, of the loan papers still on the table. I sent the photos to my personal email with the subject line "evidence" and the date and time. Then I made Leo breakfast. Real breakfast, not the spilled cereal. I made him pancakes with chocolate chips, his favorite, moving slowly and carefully because any sudden movement made my head pound. As I stood at the stove flipping pancakes with methodical precision, I felt calmer than I'd been in years. I was done. I was completely, utterly, irrevocably done. Leo ate his pancakes quietly, watching me with worried eyes. "Does it hurt, Mommy?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said honestly, sitting down across from him. "It hurts a lot. But do you know what hurts more? Staying here. Being afraid all the time, that hurts worse than anything Grandpa could do to me." "Are we going to leave?" he asked, and I heard hope in his voice. Hope. My 6-year-old son was hoping we'd leave, which meant he'd been hoping for a while, which meant he'd been unhappy for longer than I'd realized. "Yes," I said, making the decision in that moment, letting the words settle into reality. "We're going to leave. Not today, but soon. Very soon. And we're never coming back." I called into work sick. Then I called a domestic violence hotline, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. The woman who answered had a kind voice, patient and understanding. She didn't judge when I stammered through my story. She didn't push when I said I wasn't ready to file a police report yet. She just gave me information. Resources. Options. She gave me the number for a legal aid service that helped with emergency custody documentation. She told me about shelters, about transitional housing programs, about financial assistance for single mothers escaping abuse. She told me I was brave for calling even though I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified and small and so very tired. But I also felt something else. I felt determined. I spent the morning planning. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one my father had never used, transferring the small amount of savings I'd managed to squirrel away. I changed my direct deposit information for my paycheck, effective immediately. I started looking at apartments online, tiny studios, and one-bedrooms in neighborhoods across town. I made a list of everything Leo and I would need to take with us: clothes, documents, photographs, his favorite stuffed elephant. When my father and Tiffany came back at 11:45, exactly as threatened, I was ready. They came through the door laughing about something, some joke. I wasn't part of their voices, loud and confident. They expected to find me crying or desperate or defeated. They expected the signed loan papers. Instead, I was sitting at the kitchen table with Leo, helping him with a coloring book, a bag of frozen peas pressed against my forehead. I'd taken more photos in better lighting. I'd documented everything. I'd recorded the voicemail Tiffany had left earlier, the one where she'd threatened to call child services. I had evidence now. Where are the signed papers? Tiffany demanded, dropping her purse on the counter with a thud, her hands on her hips, that entitled expression on her face that I'd seen 1,000 times. I looked up at her calmly. I'm not signing them, I said, my voice steady and clear. My father's face went from surprise to purple in seconds. You think you can say no to me, he roared loud enough that Leo pressed himself against my side. You think you have any options here? You're nothing without this family. You have nowhere to go. No one else wants you. You're a single mother with no money and no prospects. You'll come crawling back within a week begging us to help you. You're too stupid, too weak to make it on your own. Every word was designed to hurt, to undermine, to destroy what little confidence I might have left. These were the same words he'd been using my entire life, the same weapons, the same attacks. They'd worked for 28 years. But something had changed. Maybe it was the physical violence finally crossing a line I couldn't ignore. Maybe it was seeing the fear in Leo's eyes. Maybe it was just that I'd finally run out of the ability to care what they thought of me. If your mother doesn't cooperate, Tiffany said, turning to Leo with a smile that was supposed to look sweet but came across as predatory, you're not going to have a very easy life, sweetie. Mommy's making things very difficult for everyone. Mommy's being selfish. Maybe you should tell her to sign the papers. Maybe she'll listen to you since she won't listen to family. She was trying to manipulate a 6-year-old child into doing her dirty work. She was trying to make my son feel responsible for adult problems. She was trying to use him as a weapon against me. I stood up then, slowly, deliberately placing myself between them and Leo. I looked at my father and really saw him for what he was. Not the man I'd spent my whole life trying to please. Not the father figure I desperately wanted him to be. Just a bully, an abuser, a man who felt powerful only when he was making others feel small. No, I said again. The word felt powerful. It felt right. It felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. You think you're better than us, Tiffany shrieked, her voice going shrill. You think you're so high and mighty. You're nothing, Sarah. You're a pathetic single mother who can't even afford your own place. You're a failure. My father stepped forward, his hand raised, and I saw Leo scramble off his chair, putting himself between us, my 6-year-old son trying to protect me from my own father. That image burned itself into my brain, and I knew I would never forget it, never forgive myself if I let this continue. Don't you touch her again, Leo shouted, his voice high and terrified but also fierce. Don't you hurt my mommy. My father looked at Leo with something like disgust. Look at what you're teaching him, he said to me, making him think he can disrespect his elders, making him think family doesn't matter. You're destroying this kid, Sarah, and you're too selfish to see it. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its boldness. He'd just assaulted me that morning, had threatened my child, was currently trying to coerce me into financial fraud, and somehow I was the one destroying Leo. You're nothing without family, my father continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet again, his finger pointing at my face like a weapon. You'll be back here on your knees within a month begging for help. And maybe I'll help you. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll let you figure out how hard the world really is when you don't have anyone. I didn't react, didn't cry, didn't argue. I just looked at him like he was a stranger, because that's what he felt like in that moment. A stranger who happened to share my DNA. My father grabbed the loan papers and threw them in the trash can, the pages fluttering. Don't expect any help from us ever again, he shouted. You're dead to this family. You understand me, dead. I already knew that, I said quietly, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the realization that his words weren't having the effect he expected. I've always known that. They stormed toward the door, and Tiffany turned back one more time. When your life falls apart, when you can't pay your bills, when you're living on the street with that brat, remember that you chose this. We tried to help you. We tried to be family. But you're too proud, too stubborn, too stupid to accept it. What I can't accept, I said, hearing my own voice like it was coming from someone else, someone stronger, someone who'd finally found her backbone, is being treated like I'm worthless. What I can accept is watching my son learn that it's okay to hurt people you're supposed to love. What I can't accept is signing my name to your disasters over and over while you take no responsibility for your own life. Tiffany's face twisted with rage. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you really are. I'm going to tell everyone that you abandoned your family, that you're an unfit mother, that you— Get out, I said, and there was steel in my voice I didn't know I possessed. Get out of this kitchen. Get out of my life. And if you come near my son again, if you threaten him again, I will file charges. I have pictures, I have recordings, I have documentation of everything you've done today, so get out. They left. The door slammed. The house shook. And then there was silence. Beautiful, terrifying silence. Leo was crying, clinging to my leg. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. My head throbbed with every heartbeat. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. I knelt down and pulled Leo into a hug, and we stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other while the morning sun streamed through the dirty kitchen window and the smell of burnt eggs finally started to fade. "We're going to be okay," I whispered into his hair. "I promise you, baby. We're going to be okay." And for the first time in my life, I actually believed it. The next week was a blur of action and terror and determination. I couldn't afford to hesitate, couldn't afford to second guess, couldn't afford to give them time to regroup and launch another attack. Every moment I stayed in that house was a moment they could hurt us again, manipulate us again, trap us again. I called into work and took my saved vacation days, all of them giving myself 2 weeks to make the transition. My supervisor, a kind woman named Janet, who'd noticed the Band-Aid on my forehead, asked if everything was okay. I told her the truth. I was leaving an abusive situation and needed time to relocate. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Take what you need. Your job will be here when you get back. And Sarah, I'm proud of you." Those words almost broke me. I'm proud of you. When was the last time someone had said that to me? I spent the next several days in a fugue state of planning and preparation. I opened a new bank account, transferred my savings, changed my direct deposit. I found a small apartment in a building on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a studio with a tiny kitchenette and a bathroom that had seen better days, but it was affordable and most importantly, it was available immediately. The landlord, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, no relation, looked at the Band-Aid on my forehead and asked only one question. "Do you need me to be careful about who I give your information to?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I understand," she said simply and handed me the keys. I worked out a schedule with a neighbor from my old street, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd always been kind to Leo. She agreed to watch him after school while I worked, charging half what the regular daycare cost. When I tried to thank her, she waved me off. "I watched my daughter go through something similar," she said quietly. "I know what it takes to leave. You're doing the right thing." But the hardest part wasn't the logistics. The hardest part was packing up a life while trying to keep it secret, trying to move without being noticed, trying to prepare for escape while still living in enemy territory. I packed slowly, carefully when my father and Tiffany were out. I took only essentials, clothes, toiletries, important documents like birth certificates and social security cards. I took Leo's favorite toys, his stuffed elephant, the blanket his grandmother had made before she disappeared from our lives. I took photographs, the few I had from before everything fell apart. I took my laptop, my phone charger, the few pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from people who actually cared about me. I left everything else. The furniture could be replaced. The kitchen items didn't matter. The memories of this house could be left behind like the garbage they were. But I also took evidence. I took photos of every room, especially the kitchen, with its dented refrigerator door. I printed out bank statements showing all the times I'd paid for things that weren't my responsibility. I made copies of the loan papers Tiffany had tried to force me to sign. I recorded the threatening voicemails that continued to come in now from multiple unknown numbers. I was building a case not because I planned to press charges yet, but because I wanted to be ready if they tried to come after me legally. On the day of the move, I waited until they were both gone. My father had a job site to visit. Tiffany had plans with friends, probably spending money she didn't have on brunch she couldn't afford. I called a cheap moving service, 2 college students with a truck who didn't ask questions. In 3 hours, we cleared out everything that mattered. I left a note on the kitchen table, written in careful block letters: "Leo and I are leaving. We need to start over. Don't contact us. Don't come looking for us. Don't try to use Leo against me. I have documentation of everything that's happened. Leave us alone." I didn't leave an address. I didn't leave a phone number. I just left. As I locked the door behind me for the last time, I felt the weight of 28 years falling away. Not all at once, not completely, but enough that I could breathe a little deeper, stand a little straighter, imagine a future that didn't include constant fear. Leo sat in the back seat of our old car, clutching his stuffed elephant, watching the house recede in the rearview mirror. "Are they going to come after us?" he asked quietly. Maybe I said honestly because I'd learned that lying to children to make them feel better doesn't actually help. But if they do, we'll be ready. And we have help now. Good people who want to help us. The first few weeks in the new apartment were brutal. The place was even smaller than I'd expected, barely big enough for a bed and a small couch. Leo and I shared the bed. I hung a curtain to give us each some privacy for changing, but there was no separate bedroom, no real kitchen to speak of, just a hot plate and a mini fridge. Money was impossibly tight. Even with my full-time job and the part-time position I'd picked up at a retail store in the evenings, I was barely making rent and basic expenses. We ate a lot of rice and beans, a lot of pasta with butter. I learned to make soup from vegetable scraps. I cut Leo's hair myself watching YouTube tutorials. I cut my own hair in the bathroom mirror, uneven and choppy, but it saved $30. But Leo was different, happier. He smiled more. He laughed. He started bringing home artwork from school that was bright and colorful instead of dark and anxious. His teacher called me one afternoon and said, "I don't know what changed at home, but Leo's doing so much better. He's participating in class. He's making friends. He seems lighter." Lighter. That's exactly what we both felt. Like we'd been carrying invisible weights our entire lives and someone had finally cut the ropes. The retail job was at a big box store, mostly restocking shelves and helping customers find items. The work was mind-numbing and physically exhausting, but it was also straightforward. Show up, do the work, go home. No emotional manipulation, no family drama, no walking on eggshells. That's where I met Mark. He was a few years older than me, maybe 33 or 34, working in the electronics department while finishing his master's degree in social work. He had kind eyes and an easy smile, and the first time we worked the same shift, he noticed the scar on my forehead. "That looks like it hurt," he said carefully, not pushing, just acknowledging. "It did," I replied, and left it at that. Over the next few weeks, we developed an easy camaraderie. He'd share his lunch when he noticed I'd forgotten mine. I'd help him reach items on high shelves when customers asked. We'd chat during breaks, casual conversation about nothing important. He told me about his program about wanting to help families in crisis. I told him about Leo, about trying to build a better life. He never pushed for more information, never pried into my past, but he also noticed things. He noticed when I came in with dark circles under my eyes from working double shifts. He noticed when I'd lost weight because I was skipping meals to save money. He noticed the cheap phone I'd bought to replace my old one, the one my father had been blowing up with calls and texts. One evening, during a particularly slow shift, Mark approached me carefully, like someone approaching a skittish animal. "Hey, Sarah," he said quietly. "I don't want to overstep, but I've noticed you're working really hard burning both ends, and I wondered if you might benefit from some resources I know about." I almost brushed him off with the automatic "I'm fine" that I'd perfected, but something about his genuine concern about the way he asked without judgment made me pause. "What kind of resources?" I asked. He pulled out his phone and showed me websites. Job training programs specifically for single mothers, grants and scholarships for healthcare certifications, community support groups, low-cost counseling services, government assistance programs I hadn't known I qualified for, food banks that didn't require proof of income, children's programs that provided school supplies and clothes for free. "I work with families in similar situations," he said gently, "through my internship, and I just thought maybe some of this could help. No pressure, no judgment, just information." I took his phone and photographed all the links. That night, after Leo was asleep, I stayed up until 2 in the morning researching applying, reaching out. Within a week, I'd enrolled in a medical coding certification program that would boost my skills and my salary. I'd connected with a single mother's support group that met Tuesday evenings at a community center 3 blocks from my apartment. I'd applied for assistance with Leo's school expenses. Mark became my friend. Not a romantic interest, not yet, just a genuine friend, who seemed to understand what I was going through without me having to explain every detail. He never asked about the scar directly, but one day during break, he said, "In my program we learn about domestic violence dynamics. And one of the most important things they teach us is that leaving is the most dangerous time, but also the bravest thing someone can do. People who leave abusive situations, they're some of the strongest people I've ever met." I looked at him, this man I barely knew who was offering understanding without demanding my story, and I felt tears prick my eyes. "I'm not strong," I whispered. "I'm terrified all the time." "Strength and fear aren't opposites," he said simply. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep going even when you're scared." Those words became my mantra during the hard weeks that followed. Because my father and Tiffany didn't disappear quietly into my past. They tried in their increasingly desperate ways to pull me back in. First came the text messages from unknown numbers. Different phones, different tactics, but always the same manipulation. "Sarah, it's Tiffany. Dad's in the hospital. You need to come." I called the hospital. He wasn't there. "Leo deserves to know his family. You're being selfish." Block. "I'm sorry for everything. Can we just talk, please?" Delete. "You're making a huge mistake. We're the only family you have." Block. They tried calling my work. Janet, my supervisor, fielded the calls and told them I wasn't available. When they persisted, she told them any further contact would be considered harassment and she'd contact the police. They stopped calling the office. They tried showing up at Leo's school. The principal, a woman named Mrs. Stevens, who I'd met with privately to explain the situation, had them escorted off school property and informed them they were not authorized to pick up Leo or even speak to him. She called me immediately and I almost collapsed with gratitude and relief. But their most effective weapon was guilt. They knew how to use it, had been using it against me my entire life. And even though I knew better, even though I understood intellectually that I'd done nothing wrong, the guilt still gnawed at me. What if my father really did get sick? What if Tiffany really was struggling? What if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving, too selfish? The support group helped with that. 8 women all around my age, all with stories that echoed my own in heartbreaking ways. Mothers who'd left abusive husbands, daughters who'd escaped controlling parents, sisters who'd had to cut ties with toxic siblings. They understood the guilt, the self-doubt, the constant second-guessing. "You're not responsible for fixing broken people," one woman said during my 3rd meeting, "especially when they broke themselves and they're trying to break you too." Another woman, older with gray hair and steady eyes, added, "The guilt you feel, that's not real. That's programming. They trained you to feel guilty for having boundaries. They trained you to feel bad for protecting yourself. But guilt is supposed to signal that you've done something wrong, and you haven't. Leaving abuse is never wrong." I went home from that meeting and cried for 2 hours, great heaving sobs that I'd been holding back for weeks. Leo came and sat next to me, not saying anything, just leaning against my side in that way children do when they're offering comfort they don't have words for. "I'm okay," I told him when I could breathe again. "These are good tears. Healing tears." He nodded solemnly like he understood, even though he was only 6. 3 months after we moved out, they showed up at my apartment. I was coming home from my evening shift at the retail store, exhausted and ready to collapse. Leo was with Mrs. Rodriguez, safe, and probably eating better dinner than I could afford to make. I was thinking about the bills that were due, about how I needed to pick up more hours, about whether I could stretch the groceries until next payday. I didn't notice them at first. They were sitting on the curb near the building entrance, and in the dim streetlight, they looked smaller than I remembered. My father's shoulders were hunched. Tiffany's designer clothes looked worn and dirty. When I got closer, they stood up. I froze, my hand automatically going to my phone in my pocket, ready to call 911 if needed. "Sarah," my father said, and his voice was different, subdued. "We need to talk." Every instinct screamed at me to run. Every therapy session, every support group meeting, every conversation with Mark had prepared me for this moment. Don't engage. Don't give them an opening. Protect yourself. But I also saw something I hadn't expected. They looked defeated, broken, lost. "You have 1 minute," I said, staying a safe distance away. "Say what you came to say." Tiffany stepped forward and I saw her eyes were red, her makeup smeared. "I made mistakes, Sarah. We made mistakes. But we're family. You can't just abandon family. We need help. We need you." The old Sarah would have caved, would have invited them in, made them tea, emptied her bank account to solve their problems. The old Sarah would have accepted blame, would have apologized for leaving, would have sacrificed herself to keep the peace. But I wasn't the old Sarah anymore. I reached into my purse and pulled out the printed list I'd been carrying for situations exactly like this. I'd updated it, laminated it, made it more comprehensive. Resources for housing, food banks, job placement services, free health clinics, mental health services, addiction support if needed, domestic violence programs that helped abusers change their behavior. "Here," I said, handing the list to my father. "Everything you need to help yourselves." Tiffany's face twisted with anger, the mask of vulnerability dropping instantly. "You're going to give us a list, like we're strangers, we're your family." "You made yourselves strangers," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. "You made yourselves strangers when you chose violence over love, when you chose manipulation over respect, when you chose to threaten my child." My father's face cycled through emotions, shock, anger, disbelief, and finally something that might have been shame. "I'm your father," he said, and his voice cracked. "You were my father," I corrected him, "and then you grabbed me by my hair and slammed my head into a refrigerator door so hard you left a dent. While my 6-year-old son watched, you stopped being my father that day." The words hung in the air between us. I'd never said them out loud before, never named the violence so directly. It felt powerful and terrifying. "I was angry," my father started. "You were being disrespectful." "Stop," I said firmly. "I'm not doing this." I'm not debating whether I deserve to be assaulted. I didn't. No one does. What you did was wrong, and no amount of excuses changes that. Tiffany dropped to her knees, then dramatic as always, her hands clasped like she was praying. Please, Sarah, think of Leo. He needs to know his family. He needs his grandfather, his aunt. We love him. We love you. I looked down at my sister, at this person who'd weaponized my child against me, who'd threatened to call child services, who'd held my son back while my father hurt me. And I felt nothing. Not love. Not hate, just nothing. Leo has family, I said quietly. He has me. He has people who love him without hurting him. He has a life where he feels safe. That's what family should be. I walked past them toward my building entrance. Behind me, I heard Tiffany shouting something about regret, about mistakes, about how I'd pay for this, but her words bounced off me like rain off a windshield. I let myself into the building and locked the door firmly behind me. Through the glass, I could see them on the sidewalk, my father's head in his hands, Tiffany pacing and shouting at him. They looked pathetic. They looked broken. And I felt relieved. I went upstairs, picked up Leo from Mrs. Rodriguez, thanked her profusely, and took my son home to our tiny studio apartment. We made mac and cheese from a box and watched a movie on my laptop, curled up together on the secondhand couch I'd bought from a thrift store. Mommy, Leo asked as the credits rolled. Are the bad people going to come back? I thought about lying, about reassuring him everything was fine, but I'd promised myself I'd be honest with him, age appropriately, honest always. They might try, I said, but we're safe here. The doors lock. Mrs. Rodriguez knows not to let them in. Your school knows not to let them near you. And if they don't leave us alone, I'll call the police. We have options now. We have help. He nodded, seeming satisfied, and went to brush his teeth. That night, I lay awake long after Leo fell asleep, staring at the ceiling of our tiny apartment, processing everything that had happened. I'd stood up to them. I'd said no. I'd protected my son and myself. And the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. I was still here, still breathing, still moving forward. The months that followed were hard in different ways. Not the soul-crushing hardness of abuse, but the grinding hardness of poverty and rebuilding. I worked constantly, picking up extra shifts whenever possible. I completed my medical coding certification with honors and immediately applied for better-paying positions. I took online courses in healthcare administration. I networked with people in the industry. I pushed myself harder than I'd ever pushed before, but this time it was for me, for my future, not to please someone who would never be satisfied. Leo thrived. He joined a free soccer league sponsored by the community center. He made friends, real friends, who came over for playdates in our tiny apartment and didn't seem to care that we didn't have much. He brought home report cards full of good grades and teacher comments about what a kind, thoughtful student he was. Mark became a constant in our lives. He helped me study for certification exams. He came over on Friday nights with pizza and played video games with Leo on my ancient laptop. He never pushed for more than friendship, seemed content to just be present and supportive. But slowly, carefully, something deeper developed. A relationship built on respect and understanding and genuine care. You know what I admire about you, he said one evening after Leo had gone to bed and we were sitting on the couch with cheap wine and the exhaustion that comes from working too hard. You could have become bitter. You could have let what they did to you turn you into something hard and angry, but you didn't. You chose to be kind. You chose to build something good. I had a good reason, I said, gesturing toward where Leo slept. He deserved better than what I had. And so did you, Mark said quietly. Those words settled into my heart and stayed there. A year passed, then another. Good years. Still hard, still full of challenges, but good. I got promoted at work, then promoted again. My salary doubled, then tripled. I saved money, real savings, in an account that no one else had access to. I paid off my debts. I built my credit score back up from the damage years of co-signing had done. We moved to a small house with an actual yard. Nothing fancy, it was a rental, not a purchase, and the neighborhood was rough around the edges, but it had 2 bedrooms. Leo had his own space. I had a garden where I grew tomatoes and herbs. We had a life that felt like ours. Leo grew into a confident teenager. He made the honor roll. He played soccer and learned guitar. He was thoughtful and considerate, nothing like the angry, controlling men in my family. He treated his girlfriends with respect. He called me when he was going to be late. He did his homework without being asked. He was becoming a good man, and I was so proud of him I could burst. Mark became my partner in the truest sense. We moved slowly, carefully, making sure Leo was comfortable with every step. No rushing, no pressure, just honest communication and mutual respect. It wasn't passionate or dramatic, it was steady and safe and real. I heard about my father and Tiffany occasionally through the grapevine. Tiffany had been evicted, was couch surfing with friends. My father had health problems he couldn't afford to treat, was working odd jobs to make ends meet. They'd burned through their bridges, alienated everyone who might have helped them. Part of me felt guilty for not swooping in to save them. The old Sarah would have. But the new Sarah understood that saving them would mean drowning myself, and I had a son who needed me to stay afloat. I had a life that needed protecting. Then came the day, everything came full circle. I was walking Leo home from soccer practice one Saturday afternoon. He was 16 now, tall and lean, his jersey muddy and his face happy from a game they'd won. We were laughing about something comfortable and easy in a way that would have been impossible in the house I grew up in. We turned a corner and there was my father. He was helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries into her house. The same neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who he'd once mocked me for helping years ago, calling me weak for wasting time on old people who don't matter. He looked old, bent. His hair had gone completely white. His hands shook as he carried the bags. He looked diminished, like someone had let all the air out of him. Leo waved politely, not recognizing him. My father glanced up, his eyes met mine, and I saw recognition. Then shame. He looked away quickly, scurrying into Mrs. Patterson's house like a mouse escaping a cat. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Not even pity. Just nothing. He was a stranger who happened to look vaguely familiar. Who was that? Leo asked curiously. No one important, I said. And it was the truth. 2 weeks later, my phone rang with a call from Detective Miller. And now here I was, standing in my sunny kitchen with my successful career and my healthy son and my partner, who actually respected me, being asked to testify against the people who'd once controlled every aspect of my life. I went to the police station on a gray Wednesday morning. Detective Miller was professional and kind, explaining the case carefully. Fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, exploiting vulnerable people. A pattern of behavior spanning years. They needed my testimony to establish that pattern, to show that my father and Tiffany had always been willing to hurt people, even family, to get what they wanted. He led me to a viewing room where I could see into the holding cells without being seen. There they were through the one-way glass. My father slumped on a metal bench, his hands cuffed in front of him. Tiffany, tears streaming down her face, but with that calculated quality I recognized so well. The tears that were for show, for manipulation, for gaining sympathy. They looked like exactly what they were. Criminals, abusers, frauds. Tiffany saw her reflection in the glass and started gesturing frantically, not knowing I was on the other side. Mouthing words. Crying harder. My father just sat there staring at his hands. He looked defeated. Broken. Small. All the things he'd once made me feel. Detective Miller stood beside me, giving me space to process. I know this must be difficult, he said quietly after a moment, but we need your testimony about the abuse you suffered. It establishes their pattern of exploitation and violence. It helps us build a stronger case to keep them from hurting anyone else. I thought about that morning 7 years ago. The burnt eggs, the loan papers, Leo's frightened face, the feeling of cold metal against my skull. The sound of Tiffany's laughter while my son screamed, the threats about taking Leo away, the years of manipulation and guilt and fear. I'll testify, I said, my voice steady. Not because I want revenge, but because I don't want anyone else to go through what Leo and I went through. I don't want another child to grow up thinking that kind of violence is normal. I don't want another woman to think she deserves to be treated like garbage by the people who are supposed to love her. Detective Miller nodded, something like respect in his eyes. You're very brave, Miss Chen. No, I said, watching my father through the glass. He looked up suddenly as if he could sense me, watching his eyes, scanning the room, searching. I'm just done being afraid. I gave my statement. Detailed, comprehensive, backed up by the photos I'd taken 7 years ago, the hospital records I'd requested, the testimony of neighbors who'd heard the fights. I spoke calmly, factually, without emotion. Just the truth. When I was finished, the detective thanked me. We'll be in touch about the trial date, he said. And Miss Chen, for what it's worth, a lot of people in your situation wouldn't have been able to leave, let alone build the life you've built. That takes real strength. I left the station and drove home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When I pulled into the driveway of our little rental house, I saw Mark's car already there. He'd picked up Leo from school, was probably helping him with homework at the kitchen table right now. I sat in my car for a moment just looking at my home. The house with the garden I'd planted. The yard where Leo and his friends played basketball. The life I'd built from nothing but determination and the refusal to give up. Then I went inside. Leo was indeed at the kitchen table, math homework spread out in front of him. Mark was making dinner, something that smelled like garlic and tomatoes. They both looked up when I came in. Mom, Leo asked immediately, reading my face. "Are you okay?" I crossed the room and pulled him into a hug, breathing in the smell of his shampoo and teenage boy sweat, and the person he was becoming. "I'm perfect," I told him honestly. "I'm absolutely perfect." That night after dinner and homework, and Leo retreating to his room to video chat with friends, I stood in the bathroom and looked at my reflection. The scar on my forehead had faded over the years, just a thin white line now barely visible unless you knew to look for it. I touched it gently, tracing the path of that old wound. For so long I'd seen it as a mark of shame, evidence of my weakness, proof that I'd let things get that bad. But now I saw it differently. It was a scar from battle, evidence that I'd been hit hard enough to dent metal and I'd still gotten back up, proof that I could take the worst day of my life and turn it into the first day of my new life. A reminder that I was stronger than anything that had tried to break me. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I looked at it for a long moment, then simply powered the phone off. I didn't need to know what they wanted to say. I didn't need their apologies or their excuses or their last-ditch attempts to manipulate me one more time. I had Leo. I had Mark. I had a home full of peace and laughter and actual love. I had a career I'd built with my own hands. I had a future that was mine to shape. I had won. Not through revenge or violence or becoming like them, but by refusing to let their toxicity define me. I'd won by choosing myself and my son. I'd won by understanding that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away and never look back. The frozen scar on my forehead had taught me everything I needed to know. Some wounds need to stay cold preserved as reminders rather than reopened as fresh pain. Healing doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes it means protection. Sometimes it means boundaries. Sometimes it means saying no and meaning it with every fiber of your being. And most importantly, it had taught me that I was always worth saving. Even when no one else thought so, even when I didn't think so myself, I was worth the fight. I was worth the sacrifice. I was worth every hard choice and sleepless night and moment of doubt. I was worth it. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to make the impossible choice between family and your own well-being? Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved because staying was destroying you? What would you do if you were in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about overcoming life's toughest challenges. Your support means the world to me, and remember, you are always worth fighting for. Always.